In Rhome, Texas, just northwest of Fort Worth, there is an old mill property that has lived more than one life. It started as part of a working community, a place tied to grain, flour, trade, and the early growth of Wise County. Later, it became connected to one of the most recognizable symbols in the state of Texas. And today, tucked behind the old mill, part of that property has been restored into something you can actually stay inside. Not a hotel, not a polished resort, but a quiet, historic property with 2 Airbnb suites, old walls, handmade details, and a bigger story still waiting for its next chapter. This is the Old Mill in Rhome.
So we're standing outside of the old mill in Rhome. When it was in operation, the business that operated at the old mill in Rhome was the Rhome Milling Company. The history is a little unique in that the city of Rhome didn't really exist until the 1930s. Rhome was really an unincorporated community that formed around 1883. And so if you do a little bit of research, I'm a history buff, so I do a lot of research. I've done a lot of research at the library. And the best I've been able to put together through what I've read in the historic record and what I've been told through word of mouth is that a couple of brothers originally purchased this property when the city of Rhome, or the community Rhome, was coming together in 1883. And they built the Old Rock building, which is part of what we're seeing here. And the best I've been able to gather is it was actually built in 1883. I believe they were the Mount brothers, and they used the Old Rock building for some rudimentary milling, but they also, I believe, operated kind of a general store out of the building for some time. But by the late 1890s, there was this new technology called rolling mill technology.
In the early days of a town like Rhome, a mill was more than a building. It was part of how a community survived. Farmers needed a place to bring grain. Families needed flour. Small towns needed industry. And places like this became part of the daily rhythm of life. Rhome's early history is tied to milling, and one of the most interesting connections is the gold medal flour name. Local history connects a Rhome mill owner to the use of that name before it became known across the country. That is what makes this property so easy to overlook and so hard to forget once you know the story. Because it does not just represent one business. It represents a time when small Texas towns were building their identity one industry at a time.
The property ended up going through, different ideations, different uses over time. And for a season in the 1980s, there was a foundry that operated here, a bronze foundry. And there was a famous sculptor, Barvo Walker, no relation. And he was a famous sculptor who made some amazing giant life-size sculptures of horses and thoroughbred pari-mutuel racing horses and all sorts of different things. In fact, he passed away just a few years ago, and he was the sculptor who was commissioned to make the memorial in Dallas for the police officers who were unfortunately slain in downtown Dallas just a few years ago. But in the 1980s, Mr. Walker operated a foundry here, and he received the commission to restore Lady Liberty, the statue that sits on top of the Texas State Capitol. Interestingly enough, the goddess of liberty, some people call her Lady Liberty. I like the latter as opposed to the former. But Lady Liberty, nonetheless, the statue that sits on top of the Texas State Capitol has only come down one time since she was fully erected in the 1880s when the State Capitol building was first built.
That one detail gives the property another layer. The same place connected to flour and grain later became part of a foundry story tied to the goddess of liberty, the statue that stands above the Texas State Capitol. So over time, this property has touched agriculture, industry, art, restoration, and Texas history. But the story did not stop there. In the back of the property, the old Grainhouse eventually became what is now called the Grainhouse Tavern, and that is where the property becomes something people can experience for themselves.
We are standing actually right now in what we call the Grainhouse Tavern. We call it a tavern. It's really like an inn. It was a 2-bedroom, 2-bath house that sat in the old grain house of the old mill in Rome. And we renovated it into 2 separate suites, Airbnb or short-term rental suites. The way that the house is set up, it just kind of worked perfectly in that there's one major wall that goes down the middle of the home, and there's a divider door that we keep locked if we have separate guests, or if we have one guest that comes out and wants to rent the whole thing, they can rent both sides, and we can open the door for them, and then they essentially have the whole home to themselves. The whole property, the whole house here, the old grain house, is about 2,000 square feet. So each unit is a little less than 1,000 feet, which makes for a really spacious, short-term rental unit, much larger than your typical motel or hotel room.
The Grainhouse Tavern is split into 2 short-term rental suites. One side has more of a farmhouse feel, with a kitchen, bar, fireplace, wood details, and a warm place to gather. The other side leans into a quieter ranch house feel, with room to read, work, write, or just slow down. And if both sides are rented together, they can be opened up into one larger stay. But what makes it interesting is not just the layout. It is the fact that this was once part of the working mill property. It was not built to be trendy. It was saved, reworked, and given another purpose.
We love this building here, and we love this grain house. Obviously, we spent a lot of time. I did a lot of the work on the property ourselves. It's an amazing story of what can be done with a dilapidated building. In fact, some of the contractors and even the inspector, when they first came out, I think they thought I was crazy for even trying to renovate this property and repurpose it. But my electrician, he told me, he said, I've been doing electrical work for almost 30 years. And he goes, when I first came out, I had no clue what you thought you were doing. He said, but now, after the project's over, this is the coolest house, the coolest property that he's ever worked on in his 30 years of doing electrical work. He really said, if I could just pick this house and put it up in my backyard, it would be the perfect place for me. One of the reasons we love it is, it's just unique. There's not a lot of places where you can have essentially a bedroom, a bathroom, and a big living room, and have a fireplace in each of those units. It's rare for a 2,000 square foot home, a 2-bedroom, 2-bath, to have 2 fireplaces.
That is what gives this place its character. There are plenty of Airbnbs that are beautiful, but this one has history in the walls. It has a connection to the railroad, the old mill, the town, and the people who took the time to imagine something new for a building that could have easily been forgotten. And the location makes sense for that kind of stay. It is close enough to Fort Worth, Decatur, and Roanoke to be convenient, but far enough away to feel like a quiet reset.
We personally believe that this is a great place to staycation if you're a person who lives in Dallas-Fort Worth or somewhere in Texas and wants to come and have a kind of an on-site sleepover, if you will, at a place with lots of history. But just beyond the old mill in Rome itself and all of the cool history that we have here, the surrounding area is pretty interesting. We're about 10 minutes from Decatur, Texas. There's a lot of cool history, and there's got a really charming downtown square with restaurants and bars and different things to do down there. And another cool piece of history, if most people don't realize, is Bonnie and Clyde, the infamous bank robbers, have said to have slept over at the the stone motel that's still there that you can go and drive by or stop and see. And there's just a lot of cool history just in Wise County in general. We're also only about maybe 15 to 20 minutes from Roanoke, which has been voted or at least named the restaurant capital of Texas.
That is the balance this property seems to offer. You can come here for a weekend away. You can stay here while exploring Wise County. You can use it as a quiet place outside the busyness of the city, but there is also a bigger possibility here. Because the Airbnb suites are only one piece of what this property could become. The old mill, the surrounding structures, the history, and the open space all point towards something larger. A restaurant, a coffee shop, an event venue, more unique guest stays, maybe even the silos being turned into something people could experience. And now, if the right person comes along, the property may be ready for its next chapter.
We originally purchased the old mill in Rhome here, this entire property, with the exception of one part over here, back around 2021. And at the time, my plan was to try to preserve it, possibly repurpose it, and do that through kind of a phased development. We had 5 phases in mind, which included the Airbnb property that we have fully renovated, a possible restaurant on site, to possibly repurpose the 2 silos into 12 inn units. We're going to call that the Silo House Inn, and then to take the old mill house and turn that into what we were going to call the Mill House Venue, which would ultimately be an events venue for weddings and conferences and things of that nature. We still were hoping and praying to be able to pull that off, but because of life in general, we've decided to put the property on the market. Obviously, there's so much potential here. We've done the math on an event venue, and we believe very confidently that if it was fully renovated, we would make $1.5 to $2 million a year just in weddings alone here at the Mill House Venue. Obviously, you would get rents through a restaurant potentially on site. The old garage in the back would be a great place for a registration desk for the inn units that could be here in the silos, which we were going to call that piece the Silo House Inn. And not only would it be a great place for a registration desk, but it would be a great place for a little coffee shop.
A place like this does not need someone who only sees buildings. It needs someone who sees the story. Someone who understands that the old mill is not just an old structure beside the tracks. It is part of Rhome's identity, part of Wise County history, part of a Texas story that has already changed shape more than once. For now, the Grainhouse Tavern gives people a chance to stay here, slow down, and experience the property in a personal way. But whether it remains exactly as it is, or one day becomes something larger, the old mill in Rhome still feels like a place with more to say. It has already been a mill, a foundry, a piece of local history, a quiet stay, and maybe, with the right next steward, its biggest chapter is still ahead.